Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez, and you're listening to episode 38 of our special series, The Dark Record, where we uncover history's eeriest stories, one strange and unsettling case at a time. In the quiet churchyard of Christ Church Parish in Barbados stands a vault sealed in heavy stone. For most tombs, that's where the story ends. But for the Chase Vault, the story begins there. Between 1812 and 1820, every time the vault was opened for burial, the coffins inside were found disturbed, shifted, overturned, sometimes stacked as if by invisible hands. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of tampering, only the grim riddle of the dead, refusing to stay at rest. The next entry into the dark record. The moving coffins of Barbados. Let's begin. The Chase Vault stood in Christ Church Parish, a simple stone structure meant to house the dead of one family. Built partly underground, its entrance sealed by a massive marble slab, it was the kind of place designed to discourage intrusion. The stone door alone weighed several hundred pounds and required multiple men to move. Once closed, the vault was secure, silent, and final. Or so it should have been. The story begins in 1812, when the vault was opened for the burial of young Thomasina Goddard. At that time, the vault already contained two coffins. One wooden, belonging to a woman named Mrs. Goddard, and another, far heavier, made of lead, holding the remains of Dorcas Chase, a daughter of the wealthy Chase family. Nothing seemed amiss, and the new coffin was placed inside. The marble slab was replaced, and the vault was sealed once again. But 2 months later, the vault was opened to receive the body of Thomas Chase, the patriarch of the family. He was known as a harsh and unpopular man, and his death was noted with little grief. When the heavy stone was removed to allow his coffin inside, the funeral party found something unsettling. The coffins already resting in the vault were no longer in their neat places. They had been shifted violently, as though thrown by unseen hands. Dorcas's heavy lead coffin had been propped against a wall at an angle that seemed impossible for any living intruder to arrange in silence. Perplexed but unwilling to linger, the mourners set the coffins back in order, placed Thomas's casket inside, and resealed the vault. Yet whispers began to spread. Who had entered the tomb? Why? And how could they have done so without disturbing the stone slab that sealed it? In 1816, the vault was opened again for another Chase family burial. Once more, chaos awaited inside. Coffins were displaced, some tipped onto their sides, others jammed into corners. The heavy caskets, so cumbersome that even a team of men could barely shift them, had been moved as though weightless. There were no signs of entry, no tools left behind, no broken seals. It was as if the vault itself had become restless. The disturbances continued. Each time the vault was opened, the same bizarre sight awaited. Coffins scattered, stacked, or overturned in grotesque disarray. Families tried to impose order, straightening the dead, sealing the door with renewed care, even spreading sand on the floor to catch footprints. But when the vault was next unsealed, the sand lay undisturbed. Yet, the coffins had moved again. By then, the story of the Chase Vault had become an island legend. Locals whispered of spirits that refused to rest, of the cruelty of the Chase family bringing curses upon their dead, of supernatural forces rattling the coffins in the dark. Others suspected pranksters, though few could explain how anyone could have moved such massive coffins without detection. What had begun as a burial site was now a riddle, one that grew darker with every reopening of the tomb. By 1819, the disturbances inside the Chase Vault had become impossible to ignore. The church, the island's governor, and even skeptical locals agreed that the strange events demanded closer scrutiny. If pranksters were at work, then precautions would expose them. If not, well, then the mystery might be darker than anyone wanted to admit. Governor Lord Combermere personally oversaw the next sealing of the vault. Determined to rule out human interference, he ordered the entrance sealed with mortar and his own personal signet pressed into the wet cement. To eliminate any possibility of tampering, he also ordered a thin layer of sand spread evenly across the stone floor of the vault. If anyone broke in, their footprints would reveal it. With the measures complete, the coffins were straightened, the heavy marble door was maneuvered back into place, and the vault was closed once more. Months passed. No disturbances were reported in the churchyard, and the seals remained untouched. When another burial finally required the vault to be opened, officials and clergy gathered to witness what they expected would be proof of order restored. Instead, they found the scene more chaotic than ever. The coffins inside had been thrown about with apparent violence. Some lay on their sides. Others were propped against the walls. The enormous lead casket of Thomas Chase had been moved again, despite being so heavy that even 6 men could barely lift it. Yet the sand on the floor was pristine, untouched by human feet. The mortar seal was intact, bearing the unbroken imprint of the governor's signet. The great marble door showed no sign of disturbance. For the community, this was the final straw. Terrified and bewildered, they concluded that something beyond human mischief was at work. The coffins were once again put back in order, but confidence in the vault was shattered. Governor Combermere ordered the coffins removed and buried separately elsewhere. The Chase Vault, empty at last, was sealed for good and never used again. From that point forward, the Chase Vault was left to history and legend. But the questions refused to die. Had restless spirits shifted their own coffins? Had the cruelty of the Chase family in life carried over into death, cursing their tomb? Or was there a natural cause hidden in the tropical soil that science had yet to uncover? Whatever the truth, the vault remained silent after its removal, its mystery locked in stone and memory. The strange activity inside the Chase Vault invited explanations, and over the years, theories have ranged from the supernatural to the scientific. For many on the island, the disturbances were simply proof that the dead were restless. The Chase family had a reputation for cruelty, especially Thomas Chase, remembered as a harsh slave owner, despised even in his own time. To locals, it made sense that his spirit, denied peace in life, would find no peace in death. His heavy lead coffin, always the most violently displaced, seemed to bear the mark of his torment. Others leaned into the occult. In the early 19th century, fear of Obeah, African-derived spiritual practices often demonized by the colonial elite, was widespread in the Caribbean. Some whispered that the vault had been cursed, that dark rituals had infused it with forces strong enough to rattle even lead coffins. Over time, the legend was embraced in Gothic retellings, where spirits, curses, and angry ghosts filled in the gaps left by silence. But skeptics pushed for natural explanations. One theory suggested that gases from decomposing bodies, so-called corpse gas, could have built up within the sealed vault, creating enough pressure to shift the coffins. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself mused on this possibility, imagining that chemical reactions in the tropical heat might generate explosions strong enough to disturb the dead. Yet the coffins were massive, some weighing hundreds of pounds, and they were moved in ways that didn't suggest a simple shove or tilt. They appeared deliberately repositioned, stacked as if by intent, which made gas pressure a difficult explanation to accept. Another possibility raised was earthquakes. Barbados lies outside the most active seismic zones, but tremors do occur. Perhaps the coffins had slid across the floor during subtle shifts in the earth. But critics countered that if earthquakes were the cause, why were no other graves disturbed? Why did the vault's sand remain undisturbed, as though the coffins had lifted and resettled themselves without dragging across the floor? The truth is that each theory falters under scrutiny. The supernatural cannot be proved, and the scientific cannot account for every detail. As a result, the story of the moving coffins lingers in a twilight zone between the natural and the uncanny, fitting for a tale born in a vault where silence should have reigned, but instead gave way to chaos. To truly understand the legend of the moving coffins, it helps to place the Chase Vault in its historical context. Barbados in the early 19th century was not just a tropical colony, it was a society under pressure. The island's planter class held immense power, but that power was increasingly threatened by unrest among the enslaved population and by shifting winds in the wider British Empire. Fear of rebellion was constant, and the ghosts of the island's brutal plantation system haunted the living as much as the dead. The disturbances in the vault then carried a symbolic weight. To the planter elite, they suggested that even the most secure tombs could not contain unrest. The Chase family, wealthy and notorious for their cruelty, became the unwilling centerpiece of this legend. Their vault, meant to project permanence and control, instead became a place of chaos. Each time the coffins were found overturned, it was as if the ground itself was rejecting their authority. Local folklore and spiritual traditions also shaped the way the events were remembered. Stories of obeah and African-derived spiritual practices were common throughout the Caribbean. These beliefs, often demonized by colonial authorities, nonetheless carried deep cultural power. For some, the disturbances in the Chase Vault were evidence of obeah at work, ancestral spirits rising in protest, or curses cast against the cruel Chase family. Whether or not anyone truly believed this, the association only added to the vault's sinister reputation. The legend also reflects the Gothic imagination of the time. In Britain, Gothic novels had already captured the public's fascination with decaying castles, restless ghosts, and crypts filled with dark secrets. The Caribbean, with its stark contrasts of wealth and suffering, became fertile ground for those same themes. Travelers like James Edward Alexander recorded the tale of the vault with a Gothic flair, embellishing it into a parable of death refusing order. To European readers, the moving coffins of Barbados were another reminder that the colonies were places of mystery, where the rules of the natural world seemed to falter. The story grew with each retelling. What might have begun as an odd report from a single churchyard became a symbol of greater forces at play: the instability of colonial rule, the fear of rebellion, and the Gothic allure of the supernatural. In this way, the Chase Vault was more than just a tomb. It became a mirror for a society struggling to maintain control, even as the very bones of its elite refused to rest quietly. When people gathered in the churchyard to whisper about the vault, they weren't only talking about coffins, they were talking about power, about fear, and about what happens when even in death, authority is shaken. As compelling as the legend is, skeptics have long questioned whether the coffins of the Chase Vault ever truly moved at all. When modern investigators look back, one of the first things they note is the absence of contemporary documentation. No parish records, no newspapers from the period, and no official reports describe the disturbances. The earliest detailed account comes from James Edward Alexander, who published his version of the tale in 1833, more than a decade after the events supposedly ended. By then, the story had passed through years of retelling, its edges blurred by folklore and imagination. Researchers like Joe Nickel and Benjamin Radford have argued that the tale may be little more than a Gothic myth, embroidered by travelers eager to thrill readers back in Europe. Without contemporaneous sources, it is difficult to know whether the vault was ever found in disarray at all, or whether the story was constructed later from rumor and oral tradition. Even if something did occur, natural explanations could account for it. Barbados is not highly seismic, but tremors do happen. A small earthquake could jostle heavy coffins, shifting them slightly over time. Others have suggested flooding as a culprit. If water seeped into the crypt, buoyancy might have nudged the coffins from their places. Heavy lead coffins might seem immovable, but if partially submerged, they could float just enough to drift across the vault. Yet these theories leave lingering problems. Earthquakes strong enough to move lead coffins would likely have left evidence elsewhere, disturbing gravestones or buildings, and no such records exist. Flooding might explain the motion, but not the reports that the sand laid on the floor was undisturbed. And in the retellings, the coffins weren't just shifted a few inches, they were overturned, stacked, arranged in ways that seemed deliberate. Skeptics argue that these flourishes are precisely what mark the tale as folklore. Over time, small oddities grew into grand mysteries, each retelling adding drama until the story became one of restless spirits and supernatural wrath. Whether pranksters, natural forces, or simply exaggeration, the Chase Vault's legend shows how quickly fact and fiction can entwine when fear and imagination meet. Whether real or imagined, the tale of the moving coffins took on a life of its own. By the mid-19th century, it had spread far beyond Barbados, appearing in travelogues, collections of Gothic curiosities, and even sermons. Writers used the story to highlight the strangeness of the colonies, places where, in European minds, the natural order was easily unsettled. The Chase Vault became less a burial site and more a stage for mystery, fear, and cultural anxiety. The legend has echoed through literature and folklore ever since. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle cited the vault when discussing cases of unexplained supernatural disturbances. Caribbean ghost stories incorporated the moving coffins as proof that spirits could rise in protest, especially in lands where slavery and injustice had left deep scars. To this day, the tale surfaces in compilations of the world's strangest mysteries, often alongside cursed diamonds, haunted castles, and ghost ships. In Barbados itself, the vault remains a point of eerie fascination. Though the coffins were removed in the 1820s and the tomb sealed permanently, visitors to Christchurch Parish still pause by the site, whispering about the restless dead. Guides retell the tale to tourists, emphasizing the weight of the coffins, the unbroken seals, the untouched sand. Whether skeptical or not, listeners often leave unsettled, imagining the noise those massive caskets might have made if they truly slammed against the vault walls in the silence of the grave. What lingers most is how the legend functions as a cultural mirror. For colonial society, it embodied fears of losing control. For Gothic audiences, it provided chills of the uncanny. For modern skeptics, it is a case study in how folklore grows when evidence is scarce, but imagination is strong. Across generations, the moving coffins have remained exactly that. Moving, not just in a physical sense, but in the way they shift between history, myth, and metaphor. Even sealed and silent, the Chase Vault continues to speak. What unsettles me most about the story of the Chase Vault is not simply the question of how the coffins moved, it's the weight of what the story represents. On the surface, it's a Gothic riddle: sealed stone, untouched sand, and lead coffins shifted like toys. But underneath, it speaks to something deeper about human fear, power, and the need to explain the unexplainable. Imagine being there in 1819, watching as the marble slab was hauled aside. You'd expect stillness, dust, the silence of centuries. Instead, chaos greets you. Coffins tipped over, smashed against walls, or stacked as if some invisible hand had been at play. Even if you doubted ghosts, how could you walk away without feeling that something was profoundly wrong? For me, the legend is less about restless spirits than about the fragility of order. The vault was supposed to symbolize permanence, a place where the family dead could rest undisturbed for generations. And yet, each time it was opened, it revealed disorder. That resonates beyond Barbados. We all want to believe that there are places, moments, or structures immune to chaos. The Chase Vault reminds us that even in death, there are no guarantees. The social context adds another layer. Barbados in the early 1800s was an island tense with injustice and unrest. Stories of coffins breaking free may have been a way for people to talk about things they couldn't say outright. The fear of rebellion, the guilt of slavery, the feeling that the past itself was unsettled. Legends often grow out of unspoken truths, and this one feels like a haunting not just of a vault, but of an entire society. The Chase Vault may be silent today, but the story continues to echo. And maybe that's the real movement here? Not coffins sliding across stone, but a tale that refuses to stay buried. That brings us to the end of episode 38 of The Dark Record. We've traced the eerie history of the Chase Vault, where heavy coffins were said to shift inside sealed stone, defying reason and leaving behind one of the Caribbean's most unsettling legends. Whether it was restless spirits, hidden natural forces, or the slow shaping of folklore, the moving coffins remind us that even in death, the promise of peace can be broken, remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we travel to Florida in 1951, where a quiet widow named Mary Reeser was found reduced almost entirely to ash in her apartment. Only 1 foot remained, still inside its slipper. The room was largely untouched, and investigators were left with a disturbing question. Could a person really burn from within? We'll explore the mysterious death of Mary Reeser. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or at our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Keep your eyes on the shadows, and remember, even in paradise, the dead don't always rest. Have a good night.